The Leave Your Legacy podcast is supported by Wise Financial. Wise Financial is a Northwestern Mutual private client group member. For over 20 years, Wise Financial has dedicated its efforts to designing comprehensive wealth management strategies for business owners and many accomplished athletes. Through their efforts, Wise Financial has been recognized as an industry-leading firm. The Northwestern Mutual Life Insurance Company, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Hello and welcome to the Leave Your Legacy Show. I'm your host, Kenyon Murray, and today we have an incredible guest, someone whose basketball journey has led to an unbelievable career in keynote speaking. Let's take a look.
For more than 15 years, Alan Stein Jr. worked with the highest performing basketball players on the planet, including iconic superstars such as Kevin Durant, Steph Curry, and Kobe Bryant. He is here today to share proven strategies on how you can utilize the same mindset, habits, and routines that elite athletes use to perform at a world-class level. Using proven principles from his book, Raise Your Game, Alan has worked with global brands such as American Express, Pepsi, and Starbucks, as well as championship caliber sports programs like Penn State football and UConn men's basketball. He is excited to provide you with a series of practical, actionable lessons you can implement immediately to improve organizational performance and achieve higher levels of personal influence, impact, and significance. Alan is a passionate father of three, and he never lets his kids beat him in anything. Ever.
On that, please help me welcome Alan Stein Jr. to the Leave Your Legacy Show. Well, I first have to ask, your journey to becoming a keynote speaker and leadership coach, it comes on the heels of being, a very, very, I would say, illustrious basketball career with some of the people that you have worked with. So indulge our audience in, a little bit of the backstory of Alan Stein Jr.
Well, illustrious is a great word. I'll take it. I appreciate that very much. Yeah, I think for context, what's most important is basketball was my first love. I fell in love with the game at 5 years old, and I'm so grateful that here 4+ decades later, basketball is still a major pillar in my life. So for the first third of my life, I was a very dedicated basketball player. Was fortunate enough to play all the way up through the collegiate level. I played at Elon College, which is now Elon University down in North Carolina in the mid-90s. And while I was at Elon, I started to develop an equal love for the performance training side, for strength and conditioning and plyometrics and nutrition and mindset. So when I graduated Elon in the late 90s, I figured what could be better than combining my first love of basketball with this newfound love of performance training. So I became a basketball performance coach, and I moved back home, which is right outside of the Washington, D.C. area, and started training players. Most of the players I had an opportunity to work with were middle school and high school age, and I had a chance to work at two very renowned high schools here in the D.C. area. The first of which was Montrose Christian, which is where Kevin Durant graduated from. And the second was DeMatha Catholic High School, where players like Victor Oladipo and Jeremy Grant and Quinn Cook graduated from. And while a part of those two programs, I got opportunities to work the Nike Summer Skills Academies. And then I got to work events for guys like LeBron and Kobe and Steve Nash. I got to do stuff for Jordan Brand at McDonald's All-American Game and USA Basketball. So I was very fortunate to have a really unique journey that allowed me to see what it took to climb that proverbial mountain, working with a 14 and 15-year-old Victor Oladipo or Kevin Durant. But then I also got a chance to be a fly on the wall and work alongside guys like Kobe and LeBron to see what it took to actually stay on top of the mountain and sustain excellence for a long period of time. And I did all of that for just under 20 years before I decided to make the very distinct pivot into the corporate keynote speaking world, which I did in 2017 and have been doing ever since and loving every minute of it.
Well, I gotta go back because obviously a lot of the names you rattled off, people will know. But I'm going to ask this, when you talk about like Victor Oladipo, Kevin Durant, guys that have, been all-stars and things like that in the NBA, was there something that you saw in them when they were 14 and 15 that you were like, okay, this kid has a chance to be great? And what was that?
Oh, absolutely. There was a direct through line between most of those players that I had an opportunity to work with at a young age. First and foremost, they understood the importance of the unseen hours. They understood the importance of getting in reps, especially when no one else was watching. Using KD as an example, that young man would rather be in a gym putting up shots than doing just about anything else in the world. So he had a real strong passion and a love for the game. Number two, he was very coachable. All of these players I'm referencing were always open to feedback and open to being coached. And that's because they maintained a humility. Now, these guys were stone cold killers on the court. They had confidence, on the court because they'd earned the right to be confident, but they always made sure that they maintained enough humility that allowed them to stay open to coaching and open to feedback. And no matter how good they were, they knew they could get better. And then one other kind of through line that connected all of these high performers is they had a strong respect for the process. Mm-hmm. They understood that no one becomes great overnight, that you set your sights on a really ambitious goal. And in their case, it was to be an NBA player. And then once they set that goal, they focused on what was right in front of them. Those guys would wake up every day asking themselves, what can I do today to inch me a little bit closer to my ultimate dream? How do I need to show up in the weight room? How do I need to show up in a film session? How do I need to show up in an individual workout or a practice? Like, what can I do today to inch myself closer to making my dream of playing in the NBA come true? And it's the commitment to those three different areas in particular is what put them on the path. And of course, and you understand this as well, they certainly had some physical and mental tools, like, Kevin Durant in particular. I mean, was an incredibly coordinated athlete, even at his height, had great spatial awareness and depth perception and great balance. He was very fluid, even though he was more on the slender side, maybe wasn't the strongest player, he was just so fluid in everything he was doing. And he could handle the ball like a point guard. He could shoot the ball like a shooting guard. And yet doing all of that, with very favorable genetic dispositions of his height and so forth.
Yeah, no, obviously having two kids in the NBA, I know I'm pretty blessed with that. But when you talk about the process, that's something that I tell kids all the time. You have to fall in love with that because you spend more time in the weight room, treatment room, on the floor doing skill development than you ever will playing the game. And if you don't love that part, you're going to limit yourself as far as how high you can go. And so I think that's super important for anybody that coaches. And as a high school coach myself now, that's one of the things we harp on. And I don't know if you feel this, but I feel that there's been a little bit of a loss when it comes to that. Everybody is all about the clips, the courtside films and things like that. So I feel it's a little bit harder to find those kids that really, like you said, love the process and understand that this doesn't happen overnight and there's all these grueling hours that have to go into it. That's a conversation that I've had so many times with even some of my current players, like, this is what you have to do. And I think because AAU has grown so much, you find parents that feel like they can just jump from program to program because, hey, this coach isn't doing that for my kid. But you have young kids too. Do you see that as some of the AAU events and things that you partake in now?
Oh, absolutely. And if we were to narrow it down to the theme that I talk about the most with my own children, it's under the umbrella of the process. It's under the umbrella of unseen hours and getting in reps and doing the little things that most people choose not to do on a regular basis. That's how you ultimately separate yourself. But you said something before that is so powerful. I want to make sure we don't gloss over it. And this is absolutely true in basketball, but I've found it's true in every area of life. One of the secrets to living a very happy and fulfilled life is learning to love the work. As a basketball player, if you only love the games, then I question whether or not you really love basketball as a whole. If you only love the result, then as you said before, that's not going to be very sustainable. So when you learn to love practice, when you learn to love workouts, that's when you've got a really strong passion. I mean, I even look at, my career now as a corporate keynote speaker. I look at when I get on stage, that's my game. That's the reward. That's the fun time to celebrate. But I actually love all of the work that leads up to getting on stage. I love doing my due diligence and learning about the client or the audience. I love rehearsing new stories and stats and lessons that I'm going to share. I love all of the behind the scenes stuff that leads up to actually getting on stage. And for me, that's one of the reasons that I know this is my current calling, is because I love every aspect of it, not just the game.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And it leads right into my next question for you is, was there a defining moment that you're like, you know what? I'm going to make this pivot and I'm going to get into keynote speaking? Because for some people, it's hard because you're defined by what you've done. Like you said, that first third of your life when it comes to basketball. And then all of a sudden, Alan Stein is what? He's keynote speaker. So was there something that just was like, okay, I'm taking this route and I'm going down this road?
It wasn't one specific moment, but it was a series of moments that all kind of were strung together. The first was I started to notice over a few week period that I was experiencing early signs of burnout. I was finding that I wasn't as excited to go to the gym and work players out. I wasn't as enthusiastic about going to practice. And I just kind of took note of that. It wasn't anything drastic. It wasn't like I had to literally like grit my teeth to show up. I just noticed that it wasn't as fun for me as it had been in years past. I wasn't as curious and as fascinated with coming up with new strength and conditioning programs. And it was starting to wear thin. So I noticed that. Mm-hmm. Around the same time that I noticed that, a friend of mine that worked for a really renowned fitness company here in the DC area asked if I would be the keynote speaker to their annual event. And I had never done that before. I'd done plenty of speaking in the basketball space, speaking at clinics to coaches and demonstrating on court. So I felt comfortable being in front of people, but I had never given a quote unquote keynote talk or a motivational talk. And he just knew me and knew my energy and knew my experience and thought I'd be a good fit. So I jumped at the opportunity. I thought it'd be something cool to try. And the moment I got off of that stage, I just knew immediately. I said, this is what I need to be doing. The game of basketball has been so good to me, and I have so much reverence and respect for the players and the coaches I've had a chance to work with. But I'm going to acknowledge and own the fact that I'm starting to feel burnt out in that realm. And this made me feel just electrified. I knew this is what I needed to pursue. So I decided to go all in with that. And it took a few months for me to finish my obligations that I had in the basketball world and to start laying the foundation for building a speaking career. But that is kind of what started to sway it. And one other point that makes this kind of full circle is there was a time in the early 2000s where I was fortunate to work an event for the NBA Players Association's Top 100 camp, and where the top high school players meet every single year to learn from former and current NBA players and coaches. And while I was at that camp, they brought in a motivational speaker, a gentleman named Walter Bond, and who's still a really renowned corporate keynote speaker to this day. And I remember sitting in that audience with these alpha male elite players and coaches, and I was just mesmerized by this guy.
Yeah.
He was captivating. He was charismatic. He was a brilliant storyteller. He had this group of tough guys. He had us crying. He had us laughing. He had us thinking. And I remember sitting there that day thinking to myself, one day I want to do that. I don't want to do it now. I love what I'm doing now, but one day I would love an opportunity to do that. And then you fast forward well over a decade when I started experiencing some of this burnout and I got a chance to step on stage for the first time. It reminded me of that seed that had been planted by Walter a decade previously. And I said, absolutely, this is the time to give this a try.
Wow. That's awesome. We'll get back to a couple other stories later in the interview, but I want to say, you've written 2 books. So you have Raise Your Game and Sustain Your Game. So as a fledgling keynote speaker myself, I've been told by a lot of people, like sometimes, writing a book is a great way to, one, introduce yourself to the world and maybe open up opportunities when it comes to keynote speaking and different things like that. Was that something you thought about, or had this book always kind of been in the back of your mind because of the journey that you had on the basketball side?
It was a little bit of both. The day I graduated college, I started to become a voracious reader. For whatever reason, I loathed reading in middle school, high school, and college. And I look back, and that's because other people told me what to read. And once I was out of college and I realized, hey, no one's going to tell me what to read now. I can read whatever I want. I started to devour books. And most of the books that I chose to read were in the personal development, self-help space, leadership space. I initially started with books by Rick Pitino and Coach K. And I had such a strong reverence for books that I knew in the back of my mind that one day I'd want to write a book. I looked at it as kind of a legacy piece. Is there something that I can put out in the world that someone else may find valuable that would live on well beyond me? And I always knew that I wanted to write a book, but it wasn't until I decided to be a keynote speaker that I actually knew this is the time to put pen to paper. And I did it for a few reasons. One, it helped me get really clear and organized on my content and my message, because ultimately what I was speaking on was in perfect harmony with what I was writing about. I mean, the raise your game is what I still to this day share with most corporate groups and audiences. So it helped me get really organized and clear on my message and the stories and stats that I wanted to share. Two, honestly, I had a little bit of imposter syndrome. I had a little bit of insecurity. I was a little worried that corporate groups wouldn't think that I had the credibility worthy of being able to speak to them. And I thought a book would be able to help with the credibility. So I did, in full transparency, believe that writing that would increase my credibility to help me get on stage. But then the third reason that I wrote it was, in addition to that legacy piece, I did realize that if I was fortunate enough to get on some stages, the book was a nice reinforcement tool. That if an audience liked something that I shared in 60 minutes on stage, then they might want to invest in the book, which might take them several hours to read, but it would be a lot more comprehensive than what I could share on stage in 60 minutes. So for all of those reasons combined, I dove headfirst into writing that first book. And then I enjoyed the process so much that I decided to follow it up 3 years later with Sustain Your Game.
Yeah. Any more in the works?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It's funny, our mutual friend, John Gordon, who kind of came up with this concept of picking one word to define your year, as opposed to a series of New Year's resolutions. And my one word for 2023 was focus. From a professional standpoint, I wanted to focus solely on growing my speaking business. And I did my best to eliminate all distractions. So I chose last year to not work on a book because I wanted to focus on the speaking business. Now, my word for 2024 is simplify, and I will start putting pen to paper and start organizing a book. I have some files on my laptop where I'm constantly saving articles and Word documents and some social posts that I make that get some engagement. It's like this collage of ideas that I'll then start to sort through and say, all right, what do I have here that I could piece together into a third book? But that will start happening towards the latter part of this year. And I would expect to have something ready 2025, maybe 2026.
Okay. No, that sounds good. I can't wait to get that one too. So I have to ask, because writing a book is very personal, and there's obviously things that you have to sort through when you talk about organizing and things like that. But I think it also reveals some things. Was there something, I don't know, good or bad, that you learned about yourself going through that process that has helped you in whether it's personal or the professional arena that, maybe you wouldn't have, I guess, acknowledged if you hadn't written a book?
Oh, absolutely. That's such great insight. Yeah. Writing a book will put you at the epicenter of being incredibly vulnerable, but I also found it both therapeutic and liberating. For me, I've always tried to write the book that I need to read myself. So even though I'm writing the book to be of service to other people, I try and write books that I will find helpful, because I know that if it's something I'm struggling with, I'm not the only person out of 8 billion people walking the earth that is having that issue. So I know that if it's something that I need help with, there's a good chance someone else will as well. So for me, as I entered into the corporate keynote speaking game, I wanted to raise my game. I wanted to ascend and work on my craft and become the best I was capable of. So that was the impetus for writing that book, was kind of uncovering all of these lessons and rituals and strategies and approaches and perspectives that I had learned from the game's best players and wanted to figure out how I could apply those to my life and my speaking business. And I've by no means reached the top of the mountain, but I did start to notice that once I had a certain amount of experience that I could shift gears a little bit and look at how can I make this a long-term sustainable career? How can I find fulfillment and enjoyment and meaning in my career for not just years, but potentially decades? And then I started to uncover that there were three things that would undermine my ability to do that. And that was stress, stagnation, and burnout. And those were three things that have plagued me for most of my adult life. So I figured, what better way to learn and to grow and move past those things than to write a book about it? So sustaining your game was something that I was looking to do as well. And I've absolutely had issues with stress and stagnation. And I already mentioned starting to feel burnout in the basketball space. So I figured if I'm feeling those things, someone else is as well. So let me research and dive into this topic, and hopefully it will be of service to others.
I love it. I love it. I guess you already answered my next question. Like, what's the hardest thing about writing a book? But, you know,
well, it is. It's the transparency and the vulnerability, because I think often people in our position as speakers and authors, a part of you, and I won't speak for anyone else, a part of me was a little hesitant and scared to be fully vulnerable and transparent, because on some level I was like, well, is this going to undermine my credibility? If I kind of open my kimono and show everyone all of the problems and issues and struggles and challenges I've faced, does that make me less credible? And what I've learned through great friends like yourself and our mutual friend Jordan Montgomery and a whole host of others is, no, that actually strengthens your credibility. That actually makes you more attractive. When you don't try to be a perceived guru or a know-it-all, which I'm certainly not, but instead you're willing to say, these are the problems I've had, these are the struggles and challenges, here's some progress that I've made, here's some things that have helped me, here's still some things that I'm struggling with. When you do that, you become human. And there's nothing that is a better connective tissue between human beings than showing someone else that you're human. So as hesitant as I may have been at first, once I felt comfortable sharing my struggles and my issues, it made me feel much better doing so. And I think it drew in a better response.
No, I completely agree. You know, my wife and I went through some struggles with our marriage, and it was actually the transparency that we put out there into the world, whether it was through Facebook or our YouTube channel. And now circling back here with the show, you know, we've done a couple different episodes on it. You really find that there's more people that say, hey, I'm going through the same things. And like you said, it creates that connectivity between you and someone that you might not even know, but they lean into you or they lean into your words because they're like, okay, somebody said it. You know, maybe they weren't in a place where they could say it or admit it, but they heard somebody else. And that's just enough to be able to start now creating conversation or asking questions that they might not have asked before because of an embarrassment or anything like that. So I completely agree with what you're saying about the vulnerability and how it can really create connectivity with your audience.
Yeah, and it takes courage to lean in and do that. I mean, it takes courage to be able to voice and share some of these things. But one of the things that unites all of us as human beings, and it doesn't matter how old you are, where you live in this world, how successful you are, as human beings, we're fallible and we're flawed. And every single one of us, we make mistakes. We say boneheaded things. We do stupid stuff. We have lapses in judgment, you know, and it's not the mistake that should define us. It should be our response to it. So there's nothing wrong with having challenges and problems and adversity. That is part of the human condition. But what we need to focus more on is, how do we move past this? How do we move to the next play, which is terminology I use all of the time? How do we grow from this? You know, we're facing a struggle or an adversity right now, and it doesn't feel good, and it's not my preference by any means. But how can I make sure that I learn a lesson from this? And how can I grow stronger and evolve and get better from that? And to me, that's the key. But the very first step is owning it and is acknowledging it. And I know for me personally, the most inspirational people in this world, to me, are the ones who have the courage to admit that they've had some struggles, are willing to share what they did to overcome that, and now are kind enough to share the things that are working well. But no one has this thing completely figured out. No one has the answers to all of it. I think we all need, as a society, to just be much more conscious about our responses to our adversities than to the adversity themselves.
I love it. I love it. And that really goes into what I want to discuss next is because you're a father, and so there's a lot of things that you have to balance. And if you think about when you were the basketball trainer, you're traveling all over the place, and now you're a keynote speaker. So how do you balance that as a dad, being on the road and then coming back? Because I know like there's certain commitments to them, obviously, to all of our kids that we have. And then there's also a commitment to your profession. So how do you do it?
Well, I don't do it easily. And in full transparency, I don't do it well on occasion. I do the best I can as often as I can. One of the ways that's helped me, so for context for your viewers and your listeners, I have almost 14-year-old twin sons who are in 8th grade, and I have an almost 12-year-old daughter who's in 6th grade. So at that middle school age, my kids are now at a maturity level where I can have some very mature discussions with them. I can have some heart-to-heart discussions. And a good portion of those discussions revolve around the fact that, hey, as your father, I love you unconditionally. I want to support you and your dreams to the best of my ability. But I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to do the best I can, but I don't have a playbook to this parenting thing. And also for context, I'm divorced. So I only have my kids about half of the time, and all of that. Now they're at an age where we can talk about that. And, my kids understand and they know how much I love what it is that I do for a living. Like, I don't just consider this work. I consider this my current calling and something I find a tremendous amount of meaning and satisfaction in. So they know how much I love what I do. But I make sure that they understand that does not mean I love my calling more than I love you all. But what it does mean is there are going to be times where I can't do both. There are going to be times where I have an opportunity to speak life into an audience, and I'm going to miss one of your middle school games. And please know that's not my preference. I'm not saying that I love the audience more than I love you, but in that time, that's what I'm choosing to do. And there will be other times where I absolutely put my children and family first, and everything else is going to have to take a back seat to that. But it can be challenging to balance. In particular, these last couple of months, January and February are very busy months on the speaking circuit because everyone's doing their sales kickoffs and starting the New Year's. So my business is really busy. Well, obviously, as you know so well, that is also prime time basketball time, which means, I've had to miss more of my kids' games than I'd prefer, but I'm missing it for a reason that I find very important. And I just have open discussions with them. And I let them know that, hey, if you're ever disappointed or sad that I'm not at one of your games, you can voice that to me. Yeah. That's okay. These are things that we want to, I want them to talk about. But most importantly, what I share with them, and I hope that I model for them, is that as their father, I hope that one day they find something that they are as passionate about as I found with speaking. That one day that they find something they're not just punching a time clock for, they find so much meaning and fulfillment in. So I'm modeling for my children that I'm going after what it is that fills my bucket, but at the same time, I still want to be as present and love you as unconditionally as possible. And sometimes things flow nicely and I can speak at a gig and I can race home and catch a game. And other times it doesn't work out as well, but it's something I will be a constant work in progress on.
Yeah. And I think it's important because that's a valuable lesson that you're teaching your kids too, because like you said, hopefully one day they're in the same situation you are, and they're going to have to make those decisions. But I think it's incredible that you're having those conversations with them. But I'm going to take a little different spin on this. So like you said, 14-year-old twins, I have twins. One of the hardest things for us as parents with the boys growing up is to really encourage people to see them as individuals, because they're always, they're the Stein twins, they're the Murray twins. Is that something that, whether it's academically, athletically, was that something that you've struggled with as well? Because you see them as individuals, but everybody else sees them as this package deal. Was that something that you've worked through too?
I'm so glad that you brought that up. It has always been something I've been cognizant of, because when the boys were born, thankfully, I knew enough people that had twins that could offer the type of brilliant insight that you just offered. So even when they were very young, even starting in kindergarten, we always put them in separate classes so that they would have different teachers and they could be their own person. They do some things together. Basketball happens to be one of the things that they enjoy together. But then even when they were younger, they would try different sports. My son Luke took boxing for 3 or 4 years, and my son Jack played something else. So we've always always encourage that. Now, one thing that has made it a little easier on our end, so my sons are fraternal, and they are very different. Like, they look very different. My son Jack is 3 or 4 inches taller and 25 pounds heavier. Even like facially, they don't look like twins. I know when you have identical twins, people literally treat them as if they're the same person. But I think to our benefit, they looked so different. They had different temperaments, different interests, different behaviors, that no one ever, really looked at them as being kind of joint. So that certainly helped. But putting them in different classes, allowing them to try different sports and activities added to that. And one of the areas where I need to do a better job, especially as a divorced father, is spending more one-on-one time with each of my kids. Usually when I have them, it's a package deal. I have all 3 of them with me. And I love that. And I love those moments. But as you know, as a parent, it's really important to carve out that individual time. That's a sacred space where you can really connect with that child in particular. And while at times I've done better with that, if you were to ask me the one area of parenting that I need to do a better job of, it would be carving out more time for individual trips or individual nights with each of my children. And I'm speaking this into existence on your show because I'm going to hold myself accountable to that.
No, I love it. We would do that too when they were younger. Before McKenna came along, we would leave, so we go to the mall or something, and we split up for like an hour. And it was amazing. Like when they saw each other, they'd be like 20, 30 yards from each other, and then they just run to each other like they hadn't seen each other for like 10 years. So
that's hilarious.
But it is important. And that goes into your daughter too. As being the younger sister, kind of the same situation that we have as well. How do you make that other sibling feel special? Because everything seems to be about the twins and those kind of things. So, how do you spoil your daughter?
Well, I think, I learned this very early in my coaching career and parenting career, that the word love is actually spelled T-I-M-E. You spell love with time. That is how you show someone that you care. And so I need to make sure that I'm making the same effort with my daughter. And thankfully, I've done a pretty good job of that. I mean, she kind of follows in her brother's footsteps. She's a youth basketball player. And, I do everything in my power to take her and drop her off from practice, to be at her games, to take her through some workouts as well. So I certainly try and treat her with the exact same reverence and respect as I treat her brothers. But yeah, it is really important to carve out that time, because especially as they're getting older and they're turning into little adults, like it's really cool to see, they're not just these little cute kids that would come up and grab around my leg when I'd walk in a door. Now they're teens, and it's important to honor that and acknowledge that. And also I have to realize that each of my children is on their own journey, and they're on their own maturity level. One of my sons is a phenomenal communicator. He's very expressive. I can sit with him and we have very adult conversations. I get back from a speaking engagement and he asks me questions about it. My other son is a little more quiet, a little more reserved. It's harder to pull information out of him. And I smile because that's actually how I was when I was a kid. I was very subdued and reserved. I didn't talk a whole lot unless, my parents were always asking me questions to pull stuff out. So I have a strong appreciation for both. But one thing as a parent that I really try hard not to do is play the comparison game and to say, hey, why can't you be more like Luke? Luke's always asking me questions and telling me stuff. Jack, why are you, Jack is on his own path, and he's a terrific young man, and I love him just as much as I love my other 2 children. And I have to respect that he needs his space. The way I talk to Luke after a tough game is different than the way I talk to Jack, because they're very different people. And the same way with my daughter, Lila. So I'm learning to make sure that I individualize my parenting, my communication, and the way I interact with my children, which of course, without sounding too trite, is what all coaches and leaders should be doing. You should never coach your 15 basketball players the exact same way. Each of the players on your team has different needs, speaks a different language, needs to feel appreciation in a different way. So it's really important as leaders that we customize the way we treat people and the way we lead to the best of our ability. Now, we should treat everyone with respect, and we should treat everyone fairly and kindly. but the way we actually interact in this world should be very personalized to the person that we're speaking with.
No, you're absolutely right. And I made this comment to our girls earlier this year. It was one of our first meetings before the season started. And I talked about they live in a world of comparison. From the time they wake up and pick up that cell phone, they're comparing themselves to everyone else out there. And so it's important that I think as a coach, one of the things I think is so important is, one, instilling confidence in young people as far as the strengths that you see in them, because you don't know what else is going on. So we're in a very unique situation as a coach where we have this time with them and we're able to connect with them. And so, like you said, whether you do it with your own kids or the people that you're around, or even if you're leading a team of adults, you still have to treat each and every one of them individually. And one of the worst things I think is comparing themselves to you or what you've done. And so even though I get a lot of crap from Chris and Keegan that they were better shooters and all that kind of stuff, I was like, my journey was a little bit different than yours. And I think we have to acknowledge that. But you're so spot on when it comes to how we interact with people. And I think that's what we need to do more of, because each one and every one of us is individual. We're special in our own right. And we have to acknowledge that, or else you'll find especially kids searching, going outside of the home or outside of the gym to find that, whether it's love or adulation or whatever it is. It's really, really important that we acknowledge the differences that each one of the people that we come in contact with, that they have. And I think that's what's needed more in the world too, and not the comparisons.
Absolutely. Yeah. Comparison can, it robs us of joy in the moment. It can make us feel less than, and really there's kind of a separation. I mean, if you really break it down, the comparison is not the dangerous trap. It's the judgment we place on the comparison that is the trap. It's, if I compare myself to you, if I look at that through a sterile, unbiased lens, I can actually use that to some benefit. But as soon as I take it a step further and go, I'm not as good as Kenyon because of this, or he's better than me, or maybe it's the judgment that we have to be very careful with. So yeah, and that has just been exponentially heightened, 100x with social media.
Yeah.
I mean, when you and I were growing up, we compared ourselves to the people on our block. We compared ourselves to the people at our school, but it really didn't get much bigger than that. Yeah, maybe you play in an AAU event and you saw, but outside of that, you kind of only knew the world existed to the end where your mailbox was. It wasn't like today where my kids can literally, scroll on Instagram and they can see who the best 8th grader in the world is. They can see, all of these different players and what they're doing. And that makes it a little bit tougher. So I do personally think today is the hardest time to be a kid.
Yeah.
But I also think today is the hardest time to be a parent.
Yeah, no
So, and I say that with a smile. I think our children are dealing with challenges that previous generations, including ours, didn't have to deal with, which then means by default, as parents, we're dealing with our kids' challenges that my parents didn't have to deal with. My parents didn't have to worry about me having a cell phone or a smartphone or Instagram or even the internet. That's how old I am.
Right.
So,
Yeah,
they had different problems then. So I think it's really important that as parents, we grow with the times. We stay open-minded to all of these different things that the world offers. We try and teach our kids and model for our kids how to use these things responsibly. Like, I want my children to be savvy on social media and to use the internet and to use all of these different tools to help them grow and become better human beings. But I also want them to be very aware of the pitfalls and the dangers of not using that stuff responsibly. So, social media and what they consume is something we talk about pretty regularly. All of my kids follow my social media stuff, which I hope I'm setting a good example for them. And then I keep an eye on what it is that they're consuming and what it is that they're taking a look at.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot tougher nowadays, but our parents don't want to hear that. So
no, of course not.
Yeah. So I do want to go back to this. So you have had the opportunities you've had to digest information from some of the greatest basketball players in the world. But there's a story you told me about. You were helping out at Kobe Bryant's camp. And I kind of wanted you to tell our audience about that, because it was one of those things that, with losing Kobe, I think a lot more people now really respect him from this standpoint. Like, we saw Kobe go through so many different chapters in his life. And his final chapter obviously was being a girl dad and that kind of stuff. But the thing that so many players talk about now is just his dedication to the little things, his dedication to the process. Working a Kobe Bryant camp, what's a story that you just like, it amazed you, but it also helped you understand, one, his greatness, but then two, his dedication to that greatness?
Well, what I'll do, since this is one of the signature stories that I love to tell on stage, if folks go to my YouTube channel, they can see kind of the longer, full theatrical version of the story, but kind of the cliff notes. And then I'm going to tie it to a couple of other conversations and stories I had with him. So in 2007, I did have a chance to work the Kobe Bryant Skills Academy. And I got a chance to watch one of Kobe's really early morning workouts. And I remember as a young coach at the time being really surprised at the basic drills he was doing. I mean, he was literally spending time doing basic pivoting, footwork drills, doing basic finishes around the basket. And I remember as a young coach being really surprised, because at that time, it was my assertion he was the best player in the world. And I was just really shocked to see the best player in the world doing such basic drills. I expected to see a lot of flash, a lot of sizzle, a lot of sexiness. And instead, he was just drilling down on the fundamentals. Mm-hmm. And when I had a chance to talk to him later that day at camp, and I asked why a player at his level would keep working on the basics, he said something to me that fundamentally changed my life forever. He said, the reason I'm the best is because I never get bored with the basics. And I know that's kind of how we started our conversation, talking about the process and the commitment during the unseen hours. But when he said that I never get bored with the basics, it was just like this light bulb went off. Because in that moment, I finally realized that just because something is basic, that doesn't mean it's easy. See, those words are not synonyms, and yet people mistakenly use them as if they're interchangeable. Basic and easy do not mean the same thing. There was nothing easy about getting up the hours that he got up and the work that he would put in. I mean, Kobe Bryant was his level of intensity was unparalleled. His precision and his focus was unparalleled. So there was nothing easy about what he was doing. But the stuff he was doing was basic. I can promise you the stuff he was doing was stuff that you taught your own sons back when they were in middle school. Right. But he was working relentlessly on mastering those moves and mastering his craft. And, when I had another conversation with him later, he said that the reason he chose to get up so early in the morning was he thought that could be a competitive advantage. Mm-hmm. He believed in the concept of separation. What are the things that I can do that is going to separate me from my competition? What are the investments I can make that's going to give me some breathing room against all of these other great players? And in his estimation, the most dedicated NBA players would spend their offseason getting in 2 workouts a day. They'd get one mid-morning, they'd go home for lunch and relaxation, then they'd come back and get one in the early afternoon. And in Kobe's mind, if I only do what everyone else is doing, then how am I going to separate myself? So in his mind, he wanted to get in a 3rd daily workout, and he decided to get that in super early in the morning. Because in his mind, I'm coming home from workout number 1 when you're coming to the gym for workout number 1. Mm-hmm. I'm coming in. So he knew that he could always be one up. But where he really understood was playing the long game. He said, me doing 3 workouts a day and you doing 2 workouts a day, that's not going to cause much separation in a month. Maybe not even in an off season. But if I start to stack years, and in his case, start to stack decades, he said, no one will ever be able to catch me because I'm just creating too much separation. Yeah. And then one other thing that he didn't say this to me personally. I actually heard this in another interview, but it was around the word sacrifice. And I found it really interesting because the person interviewing him said something along the lines of, how were you able to make those sacrifices to commit to what you did in the game? And he said, well, I never viewed them as a sacrifice. He said, a sacrifice means I'm giving up something in order to do something else. And he said, at that time in my life, I wasn't giving up anything because there was no place I wanted to be rather than in the gym working on my craft. That was the epicenter of what I wanted to do. So I didn't sacrifice anything. And I just thought that was an interesting take on that. And I love that his progression, especially after retirement, he shifted that focus to, as you said, being a proud husband and girl dad. And that became his North Star and his driving force. And that's what he would focus on. So there's a lot that we can learn from Kobe and his approach. So yeah, I'm so thankful that I shared a few moments with him, that he was able to impart that type of wisdom on me. And for me, I mean, this concept of never getting bored with the basics parallels the sign that's above my head, which is, about simplifying success. And that has become my operating system in everything I do. In every area that I aim to excel, whether it's on stage, on page, or as a father, the very first thing I'm trying to do is work towards mastery of the basics and not skip any steps.
Yeah, no, I love it. And I think, going back to the sacrifice thing, he would talk about that early morning workout. He would still get home to be able to have breakfast, take his daughters to school, get the other workout in. Then he'd be able to go and pick his daughters up from school, and then he'd do his late workout, and then he's there to tuck them in at night. So like you said, even his greatness, he didn't give up anything. He incorporated everything that he needed to do to be great in not only the basketball arena, but as a husband and father. And I don't think we look at it that sometimes. It feels like a lot of people believe like for greatness or success, you have to give something up. But when your life is simple and you can simplify it, like you said, I just think about Chris and Keegan, and how they developed. And when Keegan had this great, 47 points, hit 12 threes in a game, they asked him like, okay, what was the secret? Like, what'd you do? Like, what did you eat this morning? He's like, eggs, bacon, and fruit. And they're like, oh, is that going to become your new thing? He goes, that's what I eat every day. So it does simplify things, and you can become great by doing the simple things. And so I appreciate that story. I think there's so many people that have this huge, their admiration of Kobe Bryant went to another level after he played, just because of the things that he did and what he said. And yeah, just imparting so much knowledge on people. It's just so sad that we lost him, though, for sure.
Well, there's something you just said. It reminds me, I don't know if you've seen, or your listeners or viewers have seen the movie Central Intelligence with The Rock and with Kevin Hart. And there's a scene in there that absolutely cracks me up, but it's so on point with everything in our life, especially when we see someone successful. So I certainly don't want to be a spoiler alert for anyone that hasn't seen the movie, but basically when he was in high school, The Rock's character was kind of overweight. He was bullied. People made fun of him. And then you fast forward 20 years and he's reconnected with his high school friend, Kevin Hart. And he looks like the present day Rock, statuesque and chiseled. And Kevin Hart's character asks him and says, well, what did you do to go from being kind of overweight and bullied to being this specimen today? And he's like, oh, it really wasn't much. It was just kind of this one thing. I just did this one thing. And he's like, well, what's the one thing you did? Well, I just worked out 6 hours a day, 7 days a week for 20 straight years, just that one thing. And it's so funny to me because, I know my delivery of it isn't near as good as his, but it's kind of like, well, hey, what's the one thing you did to score 47 points and knock down 12 threes? Well, I just worked on my game and made 500 shots a day ever since I was a child. It's just that one thing. Yeah. You could say that to any high performer in any area of life. I promise you, if you get a chance to talk to Taylor Swift or to Jay-Z or to Tom Brady or to Warren Buffett or to Oprah, ask any of them, they probably will say, yeah, it was just this one thing. Yeah. And that one thing is a massive, unwavering, dedicated, relentless commitment, especially during the unseen hours, that they did consistently, that now everyone else takes for granted and is like, oh, you ate something special for breakfast? That's why you were able to knock down those threes? No, it's because I stick to the process all of the time. It's unwavering. And then tonight just happened to be a night where that was showcased.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, with all my guests, I love to have this part of it, our rapid fire series. So we'll throw some different questions at you. A lot of them are fun. So my first one is, in all of your travels, what's your favorite country that you've traveled to and why?
I really enjoyed a trip I took to Brazil in the early 2000s. I was able to go with I think it was a U16 USA basketball team, and got to spend a few days in Brazil. They have such a vibrant culture. I loved their food. Everyone was incredibly kind and hospitable. And yeah, I haven't been back since, but that's on my bucket list to get back there.
Okay, awesome. Number 2, favorite NBA arena?
I haven't been to the new Golden State Warriors arena, but the one they had previously, I was able to go to and had a blast there. And then if I had to pick a single favorite, I would actually say the Oklahoma City Thunder. When KD was playing, I went down, and it was as close as I've seen to like a college environment. Like the fans, they were treating it like it was a college game. It's been my experience that some NBA arenas have a little bit of an older, more stoic feel, but yeah, that place was absolutely electric. So I would say the OKC Thunder is pretty high on that list.
Okay, awesome. Number 3, if you could compare yourself to any animal, what would it be and why?
Wow, I love that question. Well, I often say that for the 20 to 30 minutes before I take the stage and speak, I have so much adrenaline and energy. I feel like I'm a caged lion. Like I'm usually kind of pacing back and forth backstage somewhere. Like I have all of this energy that I'm just ready to get out. And I literally feel like a lion in a cage that they got to open that thing up and let me out on stage. So I'll go ahead and say I'm a lion.
Okay, awesome. Last one. If you had a pet parrot, what would you teach it to say?
Ooh. I would probably have them say something rather cliche, like a typical motivational speaker. I would certainly encourage the parrot not to use some of the colorful language that I use in my own personal life, and especially some of the things that I watch and listen to. So I'd have to make sure that the parrot was at least PG-13. But I would probably tell the parrot to say my all-time favorite phrase, which is just next play. Like no matter how something goes down, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent, quickly move to the next play. It's something I say to myself dozens and dozens of times every single day.
I love it. I love it. Well, I always end the show with a quote, and I try to align my quote with the guests that I've had on. And this one actually comes from Benjamin Franklin. It says, either write something worth reading or do something worth writing. And you definitely have done that. So I just want to thank you for taking the time out. I think our guests, I know that they're just excited about having you and learning more about you. And obviously, if there's an opportunity, we'd love to have you back on the show. But thanks again for taking the time to being on the show today.
Oh, this was so much fun for me. My pleasure. I really appreciate your friendship first and foremost, but your leadership and your mentorship, especially as a parent, is invaluable. Love the show, love what you're doing, and was happy to be a part.
All right. Thanks, man. Well, we want to thank Alan Stein Jr. for coming on the show. We also want to thank Wise Financial as our title sponsor, Storyline Multimedia. Without them and their crew, none of this would happen. You can find our show on Roku or Amazon Fire TV, as well as our YouTube channel, The Leave Your Legacy Show. I'm your host, Kenyon Murray. Until next time. This podcast is sponsored by Storyline Multimedia. Storyline is an Iowa City-based media company that specializes in creating high-quality video, photo, and audio productions for local businesses. Not only that, but they also produce a number of podcasts, including this one. So if you're interested in sharing the story of your business with the world, contact them today by visiting StorylineMultimedia.com. And remember, your story matters.